When I think of safety, I often imagine a list of rules and guidelines I must follow to prevent injury. I think about the summer months when I take my children to the local swimming pool, and there's a huge sign hanging on the fence with a list of pool rules that, if followed, will prevent visitors from getting hurt. The focus is on compliance and holding people accountable in order to avoid unwanted behavior. And you often see this compliance culture in the workplace. My guest today, David Galloway, has a different perspective on safety in the workplace, one that focuses on building a purpose-driven leadership culture that strengthens employee engagement and promotes proactive safety conversations. This is E3, Empower and Engage with Empathy. All right, welcome to the podcast, David. So nice to have you in the very first episode of E3. And I'm going to start off with a really important question, which is the name of your consulting firm and why you called it Continuous Smile. So could you tell us a little bit about what Continuous Smile means and what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here as well. So, continuous mile, I named that purposefully when I started my consulting business a little over 10 years ago, and it's really an amalgamation of two different things. So, part of my career, I spent time in a continuous improvement capacity, Lean Six Sigma, improving processes, and my consulting practice is centered on safety leadership. And anyone in a safety capacity will tell you that safety is a continuous journey. It never ends. It's not a destination. It's a journey. So what I propose is what we do continuously. And then the MILE, the MILE is an acronym that stands for minor improvements, large effects. Because in my view, as I tell my clients, there's really, when it comes to protecting others and making sure that our employees are safe, there's really not a silver bullet. There's no one thing that if we just do this, we can assure ourselves that no one will get injured at work. In fact, it's a series of minor improvements that we as leaders can make that could have large effects if we implement these series of minor improvements. So, thus, continuous mile is a series of minor improvements that we can implement as leaders, that if we do those continuously can have a significant impact on people's lives.
I love that. That's super creative, and I think it speaks a lot to the importance of organizational culture and the leadership culture specifically. And I know you mentioned this in your recent book, Safety Walk, Safety Talk, which I have conveniently with us today to show our audience. And in my introduction to the podcast, I talk a lot about the difference between a compliance culture and a culture that really nurtures its people and committing to empathy and taking care of people. So could you talk a little bit about that, the compliance versus commitment type culture, and how important it is for leaders to really have a shift in mindset and in the way they approach safety?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the cornerstones, when you understand, to try to understand how to be a more effective safety leader is, um, to paraphrase Simon Sinek, you have to start with the right why. And in fact, I propose two different models for people to think about as a leader. So, simply put, in one model, if you start with the why of control, if the reason you are uh, leading people or managing people is you're trying to maintain or exert some sort of control, then how you will have a conversation is largely through some kind of criticism. And what you're really seeking is to correct what you see as errant behavior. So those three things, control, criticism, and correction, lead you to a culture of compliance. People are short term and minimally compliant. And so you can obviously see the very shortcomings of that approach. There's another set of 3 C's that take you to a very different place. And that is if you start with a why of caring for others. So if you start with a why of caring, if the reason you have a safety conversation is you genuinely care about others, then how you will have a conversation is through coaching, at least initially. And what you're really seeking is collaboration. So start with a why of caring, use coaching and collaboration. That drives a culture of commitment. And the two cultures couldn't be more different, because in the first culture, where you are controlling, it's all about managing people like things. In the other culture, the culture of commitment, you really are seeking collaboration and a long-term relationship. It is all about relationships. And only if you have a trusting relationship with your employees are they truly going to be committed to their safety and the safety of their coworkers. So really, the essence of those two cultures is driven by the leader. So your leadership style drives the type of culture that you work in. And in fact, I tell folks who at the beginning of the workshops that I facilitate that the key is that you need to learn how to be an empathic listener. And that's really easy to say, but more challenging for most of us to do. But I say the empathic listener because we can listen, sort of half listen, or we can listen with intent, um, that's driven by caring what the other person is saying and being genuinely interested in what they're saying, what they are sharing with us, with the goal of the ultimate goal of every safety conversation that I teach people how to have is to learn and improve. So the goal of the conversations, I have a structured 5-step process that I teach people. The goal there is for every conversation, you need to ask yourself, um, as a result of the conversation, what did I learn and what opportunities do we have to improve? If I can't answer those questions, then if I self-assess afterwards, I can say that probably really wasn't an effective conversation. It may have been interesting. I may have talked to someone. We may have had a dialogue. But if I didn't learn something out as a result of that conversation and identify an opportunity for improvement, there's probably not much going to happen as a result of having engaged with that person. So hopefully that gives you some perspective of the difference for those cultures. Culture is driven by leadership. And the culture, the reason that's critically important in a safety context is I have data that substantially reinforces the fact that in general, and this can be measured, the higher you are on the cultural scale of commitment, the more likely it is that you are going to have fewer people injured in the workplace. So it all starts with why. The why should be caring, with a goal of garnering commitment through empathic listening.
There is so much I could unpack from what you just said. I love that you started with Simon Sinek, who I'm a huge fan of. And I find it interesting that you mentioned the start with why piece, and a lot of companies have taken on writing a purpose statement and communicating it externally and internally. But purpose goes so much more beyond just the words on a piece of paper. You actually have to walk the talk. And I think that's the whole premise of your book, is that you are incorporating a safety culture where leaders are actually walking the talk and living that caring culture with their people. So just curious, I'd love to hear an example of a company where you've come in and you maybe have seen a pretty challenging safety situation and you had to basically help leaders evolve their safety conversations with people. How did you do that, and what made that team so successful in the end?
Well, yes, of course. I'm very fortunate to have a client base that spans the globe. So I have clients not only in North America but abroad. And over the last decade, I've been privileged to be invited to spend time with their leadership teams. And uh, the most satisfying and gratifying engagements are those that where I have not just a one time come there and talk to them, but rather really enable them, give them some skill set that then they can implement and it can garner tangible results. And so I can think of a number of those that I've had the privilege to witness and observe over time. But I'll just choose one. So this client is a large manufacturer in the Midwest, about 300 employees, and when I first was contacted by their VP of Ops, um, he was openly frustrated because he was new to the position and he hadn't been only been there a few months, and he had seen right away that the culture there was really not what it needed to be. He felt to really achieve the kind of safety measurables and climate that he really desired. In fact, if you looked at their lagging indicators, a lagging indicator meaning the after the fact measurables, in industry, there's different ways you can measure, but let's just call it an injury rate. So the injury rate, if you looked at industry norms, they were in the lower quartile. So not a good place to be. Um, so I came in and spent a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, with 15 to 20 leaders in the room at a time. And I do a full day workshop and I walk them through a process of getting to think a little bit differently about who they are and how they can impact people's lives in the way that they lead. Uh, and without going into the details of what that looks like, at the end of that time, I had seeded uh, some thoughts, obviously, with this group. And it's up to them and their leadership group then to embrace it. Some do, some do not. Fortunately, the best situation is when you have a senior leader who is going to drive this change. And so he set the tone and the expectations. Um, Amid a very skeptical group because they had been there a long time and they didn't know any better, right? These are not that they're bad people. Often they're just ignorant. And I say that in its simple definition of ignorant. They just didn't know what they didn't know. Once they were informed and saw a different way, then they needed to actually start behaving differently as leaders. So, what does behavior look like? So, just I'll outline just a couple of things. So, what do we mean by a change in behavior? So, um, it's simple things, yet radically different things that they had not done before. For example, when there was a safety issue or something where there was a chance of a risk of someone getting hurt, sometimes you can see these things in advance. The old way would have been, well, let's just wait until we can have a convenient change of orders, and we'll shut the equipment down when it's best suited to our schedule. The VP of Ops, rightfully so, as I coached, was no. If people really want to know if I care about them, you shut it down immediately now and you resolve the issue, because people people know, people see that. How can you say you care about my safety if you're trying to produce one more unit of product, right? And at the risk of me being injured. Uh, so I teach people how to coach for safety, because if you don't know how to coach others for safety, the employees tend to see you as a cop. A safety cop is what I call it. You police for safety, right? I only look for what I see as wrong, and I write tickets. Not literally, of course, but figuratively, that's what I'm doing. I'm writing a safety ticket for you. And so I'm demanding your compliance, which I get, incidentally, short term. But the other thing, too, is a key part of why people take risks and make mistakes is people don't realize this, or they don't want to acknowledge it, but I openly discuss it in my workshop. We are all human and we're all fallible. Fallible means we are subject to mistakes every day, all day. And sometimes those mistakes, if made in a risky situation, could lead us to getting injured. And so one of the key things is stop blaming people for making mistakes. There's this nefarious cycle, this downward spiral, where when someone makes a mistake, if my reaction to that is to counsel or discipline that individual, then I enter what is called the blame cycle. And the blame cycle is a terrible place to be, because it just spirals down and leads to people being reluctant to bring up things, and we hide things, and we don't discuss them, and we don't make improvements. And then errors don't decrease, they increase as a result of that. So stop blaming people and be more empathic. In fact, in a healthy culture, the correct reaction for a mistake is not to blame, but to console. To console, not as in consoling someone who is in a grieving situation, but replace console with empathy. What it says is that when you make a mistake, you express empathy, meaning I acknowledge that I could make the same mistake that you just made. And it's not that you are a bad employee. It's just that you were set up to make a mistake. And I'm more interested in figuring out how we can eliminate the possibility of that mistake than I am on blaming you or naming someone. So a huge shift in a thought process. And then the senior leaders, I challenge them to say, how do you know if there's changes happening before you can measure the results and fewer people getting hurt? Well, one of the things I insist they do is they go out frequently, if not daily, at least every other day. And you ask the frontline leaders, share with me a conversation that you had with an employee about safety proactively, not reactively, proactively. Tell me about it. Who did you talk to? What did you talk to them about? What did you struggle with? What was good about the conversation? What did you wish you would do over again? What did you learn? What can we improve? Simple little questions like that. Guess what? If a senior leader and his or her direct reports ask that daily, pretty soon people get the message. It's kind of important that we talk to people about safety every day. Because if I don't want to be caught flat-footed when my boss taught me about a conversation and I can't recall one. That means I probably haven't been talking to my people very often. I could go on and on, but just one more thing that's very lacking. There's a plethora of examples of where people are constantly reminding people to be compliant. There's not so many examples often in an environment like this where you are positively reinforcing those who are doing things right or well or safely. We just walk by all those instances and we just assume that, well, yes, of course, people should be doing the job safely. That's how I trained them to do the job. So why should I have to say anything to those people? And of course, that's wrong-headed thinking, because we all know intuitively right, in our own lives, regardless of what it is, positive reinforcement works. So if we want somebody to repeat something, then the best way to get them to repeat it when no one is watching is to positively reinforce it now and then, so that even when no one's around, they are going to do that for which they have been reinforced earlier. So to sum up, those are just some examples of that. In short, those directing the work started leading for safety as opposed to managing for safety. So the key difference here is, are you managing for safety or are you leading others for safety? And there are dramatic differences, all driven by your style. So what are the measurables? So 2.5 years later, there was a measurable shift in the culture. There's an instrument you can use to measure safety culture that I developed. We won't get into that here, but you could ask the employees and they'll tell you, does it feel different around here? The lagging indicators followed. In fact, there was a 40% reduction in injuries during that same time frame. There was a significant increase in the number of employees who wanted to volunteer to engage in safety committees and safety initiatives. They're not there, right? But they are now slightly above the median in their lagging indicators for injury rate, but they are on a journey. It's a journey, but they are now on a very good path. And if they are consistent and persistent with these leadership actions, I'm confident that another 2 years from now, they're going to really like where they are. Not only the leaders, but the employees are going to feel a real difference in going to work every day. And that's really what it's all about.
No, I think that's really inspiring to hear some of these examples of companies who've been able to transform their cultures successfully. And then I'm actually reading a book right now that talks a lot about empathy and how it's a learned skill. Some people think, oh, he's a psychopath; he could never be empathic, and you could think that maybe it's a genetic trait, but clearly, and I think your safety culture teaching is a really good example of how you really can teach and coach that culture of empathy that's so required in reducing injuries and creating a safe workplace. So I think there's hope for empathy in the workplace. The other point I wanted to make too is around recognition. So I think what you mentioned, it seems super basic, but I think a lot of companies lose sight of the importance of recognizing people for doing good work and reinforcing that positive culture that you want to achieve, whatever it is, whether it's safety or something else. And I've read a lot of articles and books recently that really demonstrate how you can really build an engaged workforce simply by recognizing people for the good work they're doing. So really easy. It doesn't cost anything, but a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, that I totally agree to that. As a matter of fact, there's one thing that I share when I talk to people about that piece of it. So there's this. I love little acronyms that you can remember. There's kind of things that can help us remember these tools. So the little acronym that I help people to remember, it's POWRR. So just it's a strange spelling, but phonetically, power, but spelled with double R as opposed to ER at the end. And the POWRR stands for point out what was right. That's the first POWR. And the second R, what you want to see repeated. Point out what was right and what you would like to see repeated. So the way to remember this is to use your power. And so I challenge people to say, I ask them to say, how much power, double R, do you have? How much power do you have? And they're perplexed a little bit when I first asked that. And they say, what do I mean? How much? And of course, the answer is unlimited. You have an unlimited amount of power. So use it. Use a little bit of it because you'll never run out of it. You will never bounce a thank you check out of your checkbook, right? That you will never bounce a check. You always have an unsupplied, yet we act as if I only have a certain amount that I can spend every day. That's not true. We just naturally go to the fires and try to put them out in our daily lives and look for the things that are going awry, rightfully so, but at the cost often of acknowledging what people are doing right and well and not taking just 15 seconds. We're all busy people, but don't tell me you don't have 10 or 15 seconds to give somebody positive reinforcement. So that's just another little thing that I get, leaders use as much power as they do pointing out things that are wrong. So that's just another little minor shift that can have a huge effect.
I love that. And what a powerful way to end this podcast. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and insights, David, and huge respect for all the work that you're doing and driving more empathic workplace cultures to reduce injuries and make sure people come home to their families safely every day after work. Thank you for being a guest today. And there you have it. David Galloway, author of Safety Walk, Safety Talk, and founder of Continuous Mile Consulting. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. I enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.